The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Oshkosh Media, the City of Oshkosh, or your video service provider.
Brian Conroy is a fifth-generation Irish in the United States with his family, having come from various countries around the island. He has a BA in history from the University of South Florida, Tampa, and is the first sergeant of the present-day 1st Michigan Engineers Reenactment Camp out of the Chicago area. And he is also vice president of the Will County Historical Museum and Research Center in Lockport, Illinois. With that, I introduce you Brian Conroy.
Thanks, sir. Are we good back there? Okay. First, thanks to Connie. I've known Connie for many years, and she called me last August because you guys had Helen Meelam, who's come and spoken to Mother Bickerdike. And I've known Helen, we refer to in the reenacting community as Mother. Because she'll look after us, and if we don't do what she says, she's on us, so she is Mother. And so apparently she told Connie, and Connie called me last August. I was actually setting up for a reenactment. It was a Friday night. She's like, "Can you come up and do it?" I was like, "Sure, I'll do it." So, so he said 5th generation. I think I'm probably a little bit more since I've done more research on my family. But anyway, so tonight I'm going to be talking about the Irish in the Civil War, and I'll also include a little bit on some Wisconsin Irish as well, who served. So this painting right here is by the artist Don Troiani. So I'm sure everybody in here knows Don Troiani. This is the representing the 37th New York Volunteers, also known as the Irish Rifles. So we'll actually start with why they fought. Why did the Irish fight? So those in the north and those in the south actually had various reasons, and some were similar as well. So in the north, mainly they were fighting for economic and religious opportunities. They wanted to obtain military skills that they could bring back to Ireland to use to fight against the British to free the island. There was also a hope that the United States, those in it would see how well they fought, how valorously they fought, and they would respect them, and maybe support them in their fight against British oppression and support their fight for freedom. In the South, they saw the struggle between the North and the South as akin to the Irish and the British struggle. So they saw a similarity between those two. They saw, it was a civil war, so they actually saw it as their adopted country fighting against an oppressive government just like they did back in Ireland. And they saw the Emancipation Proclamation as a threat to them economically. Because how they saw it was, if you were an employer and you had your choice between an Irishman and a free black, the Irishman was going to would have charged more. So they would have been able to get cheaper labor from freed slaves or anything like that. So that's why they were against quite a few of them were against the Emancipation Proclamation, was for that reason. So actually start in Italy. I know, don't worry, we'll get to why it pertains to this. So you had the Irish Papal Brigade, also known as the Battalion of St. Patrick. So this is Italy prior to 1870. 1870 is when Italy became a unified country. But prior to 1870, this is what Italy looked like. So you have the Papal States, which were owned by the church, and you have various other principalities and countries and kingdoms as well. So it actually began, a unification movement actually began in the 1850s with Giuseppe Garibaldi and Giuseppe Mazzini. So these two guys right here. So here's Mazzini right here, and here's Garibaldi right here. So they led the Kingdom of Two Sicilies and Piedmont, Sardinia. So Kingdom of Sardinia is here, and Kingdom of Two Sicilies is here. So they were at bookends of Italy, and they saw it as, they could kind of press and unify Italy. So the Pope actually sent out a call to Catholics across Europe, come and defend the church, defend the Papal States. 1,400 Irishmen answered that call. However, the British had passed the Foreign Enlistment Act. What that was let's see, it prohibited British subjects, which the Irish were considered, from enlisting in a foreign army. So the Irish actually, how they worked their way around that was they actually traveled to Italy as pilgrims, as immigrants, as workmen. They even had their priests come along with them. That's how they did their workaround so that they could get to Italy and fight for the church. So the reason why the British were actually for a unified Italy, because they saw that as forming a destabilizing power against the French and Austrian powers, which the British wanted that. And again, because the British wanted it, the Irish did not. That's another reason why they would go. It was only 18 days. It was only an 18-day war. But you had about 70 to 100 Irish who were killed or wounded within that 18 days. So after 3 or 4 weeks of being in prison, they were sent home. If you were an officer, you were put on a boat and sent home. If you were an enlisted man, you walk. That's how you got home. All those who fought were actually given a medal by the Pope. So it's this. This was one, it was found on the battlefield of First Bull Run, and it belonged to a man named John Hamilton. He served with the 79th New York. What it says, so you have Pro Petri Sedi, and then you have the Pope right here. So what that translates into is it's Pius IX, Pontifex Maximus, 15th year. So it's his 15th year as Pope. And then right here, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that, but it pretty much translates into the victory of our flock conquers the world with faith. This is actually, I found this online, this is actually in the archives of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I actually found this image online. So we'll actually, so Miles Walter Keogh.
Do you know why they have that cross upside down?
I do not. Okay. I do not. All right, so Miles Walter Keogh, he was born in County Carlow. This is his CDV as a second lieutenant in Italy. This is taken in 1860. He always kept it on him. He was very proud of his service. Saw action at 2nd Manassas, Gettysburg, Atlanta. He was a POW. He stayed with the Army after the war, after the Civil War. He went with the 7th U.S. Cavalry. 1876, what happens? Little Bighorn. He was killed at Little Bighorn with Custer. This, in response to Little Bighorn, the U.S. Army actually 6 weeks later, there was a raid on a Sioux village, and this CDV was recovered in that Sioux village. Patrick Clooney, born in County Waterford, he originally enlisted as a private in the 69th New York, and then he eventually went high enough in rank, and he went back to New York, raised the 88th New York, and he was captain of a company within the regiment. He was killed at Antietam, rallying the Irish at the Sunken Road, and that's what this portrays, is him rallying the Irish at Antietam. This painting is entitled Aaron's Son. It's by Bradley Schmiel. It was painted in 2002. Dan Kiley, this guy right here, born in County Waterford as well. He was wounded at Port Republic leading Ohio Cavalry. He became colonel of the 2nd Louisiana in 1864. They were a colored regiment. He was brevetted brigadier general in 65. He stayed in Louisiana, and he died 2 years after the war as a plantation manager in Louisiana. Same picture, J.J. Coppinger, this guy right here. When I first looked at it, I was like, okay, which one is he? Then I go back, and it was because he has the beard. That's how I was able to identify him. He originally enlisted in the regular Army, 14th U.S. Infantry. The thing about a lot of men who were in the regular Army, there was not much advancement for men. So when the Civil War came along and they were raising volunteers, there was more opportunity for advancement in rank. So a lot of regular Army officers and men, they actually resigned from the regular Army and went home and raised their own regiments or own companies to get a higher rank. So he became colonel of the 15th New York Cavalry. Went from captain to colonel. That's a big jump. He was wounded at 2nd Bull Run, Appomattox. He stayed with the Army after the war. He retired as Major General of U.S. Volunteers in 1898, and he's buried at Arlington. That's him when he retired in 1898. So after the Spanish-American War. I like the hat. Hat's interesting. So on to different regiments. So this is actually a broadside for recruitment for the 13th New York, probably on New York. So, yeah, so, and it says here, every man must be in good health, hardy, able to leap over a 5-barred gate, and fit to beat the devil out of any slave driver that ever lived. I like that. That's a good description right here. Wanted immediately about 15 fine slashing fellows. It's an interesting description right there. Not less than 5'7". All right. So that was in Boston. So they were in Boston. Irish Brigade. So it started out with the 69th New York as a militia regiment, commanded by Michael Corcoran, and it became the heart of the Irish Brigade. July 61, they were at Battle of Bull Run, and they actually got praise from both northern and southern newspapers. From the Memphis Argus in Memphis, Tennessee, they said, "No Southerner but feels that the 69th maintained the old reputation of Irish valor." High praise from the South. They were only a 90-day enlistment, so only a 3-month enlistment. So when they got back, Corcoran was actually given permission to raise the Irish Brigade, and Maher was. And you had 3,000 men sign up for the new Irish Brigade. So December 61, that brigade was composed of the 63rd, 69th, 88th New York Infantry, 2nd New York Light Artillery. That following spring, they were joined by the 116th Pennsylvania and the 29th Massachusetts. Now, the 29th Massachusetts they were not Irish. They were pretty much Protestant from around Boston. But they actually got along together. But then after Antietam later that year, they were then replaced by the 28th Massachusetts, which was an Irish regiment. Fredericksburg, the brigade suffered a 45% casualty rate. 545 men out of 1,200 were killed. That's a big hit right there.
Excuse me, first or second Fredericksburg?
First. So you had 7,000 men enlisted in the brigade over the course of the war. Approximately 4,000 of those were killed or wounded. So that's 57% rate, casualty rate and wound rate. So this is Michael Corcoran. dashing guy. County Sligo. He was a constabulary in Donegal at 19. He was responsible for distributing food and other things to famine victims, but what he saw really radicalized himself, because even during the famine, there were still crops being grown, but the land that they were grown on belonged to English landlords, and all that food and everything was not being given to the Irish people who were starving and suffering. It was all being shipped to England, to their English landlords. So that radicalized Corcoran, and he joined the Ribbon-Men in 1848. Now the Ribbon-Men, their main goal, what they did was they destroyed farm equipment and they maimed livestock. They pretty much focused on hurting the English that way. When his involvement was found out and reported, and he realized, okay, this is not good, so in 1849, he decided to, when he was found out, he sailed for America. He joined the 69th as a private in 51. 7 years later, he was captain of the 69th and manager of Hibernian. Hibernian Hall was like the cultural center of Irish immigrants. So when you arrive as an immigrant, they helped you find a place to live, find employment, and get you situated in the community. You can learn English, things like that. September 58, they were ordered to Staten Island to put down a riot. Because when a lot of times, up until I don't know when, the U.S. government, if an immigrant arrived and they were sick, they were put in a camp it was a quarantine camp, so that they would not infect the rest of the general population. However, along with the quarantine camps, there were actual other people who lived on Staten Island, and they were not happy about those camps being there. So they actually rioted, and the 69th was sent in to put that down. Fall 1860, they were ordered to attend the ball and lead the 69th in a parade in honor of this man, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, later Edward VII of England. If you're an Irishman, are you going to lead your Irish men, in a parade in honor of him? Oh, he refused. So native citizens, they saw that as ingratitude and divided loyalty. Because that's one of the things about Catholics. One of the reasons why Catholics were despised, especially Irish, was by Protestant citizens, the Catholics were seen as first being loyal to the Pope and to the Church. And so that's why it took so long, for the Irish to be accepted, because they were seen that way. So this even further made people think that he was loyal to the Church, because he would not honor this. So he was arrested, put in a court-martial. What happens in April 1861? Fort Sumter. So the Army knew that he could get men, and men were needed. So the charges were dropped, and all of that made him into a bigger celebrity than he already was. Over 4,000 men wanted to enlist in the brigade. So you had 1,800 men were waiting on the street to enlist at the office. 3,000 men rode in from various places around the country, even overseas as well. They wanted to enlist. First Bull Run, he tried rallying the 69th. He was shot in the leg, taken prisoner for 13 months. So he was a prisoner for over a year. He was exchanged the next year for a Confederate colonel, so equal rank. So that's what it was. You were exchanged for equal rank. He was brought to dinner at the White House. President Lincoln promoted him to brigadier general and sent him back to New York. He raised the Irish Legion. That December, he was at Fairfax Courthouse. Horse fell on him, crushed him. He died the next day. His body lay in state in City Hall for 2 days. And from City Hall to St. Patrick's Cathedral, the streets and the church were completely packed with mourners. So this is a broadside for recruiting for the Irish Legion. So relief tickets, city, state, and United States bounty to be paid on being mustered into the United States service, good rations, and handsome uniforms supplied at once. Camp situated on Staten Island. Back to Staten Island. Headquarters here, and then here's your offices. And then you'll see on a lot of flags, a lot of broadsides, you'll see this is a very common theme in Irish recruitment and all that. You have the harp and the clover and even the sunshine. It's very, very common. You'll actually see that. So this is a picture, 164th New York Irish Zouaves with the Irish Legion, a couple of terriers, a couple of little puppies. They're relaxing in camp. Thomas Francis Marr. That last name is pronounced every way to Sunday. Maher, Mar, Meager. I've heard all of them. Yeah, Mir. There you go. I've come across where a pronunciation of his is Mar, M-A-R. That's how it's pronounced. So he was from County Waterford. So he also became radicalized. Joined the Young Irelanders in the 1840s. They wanted to eliminate English rule. July 1848, their first, one and only outing to try and do it, failed. He was actually originally sentenced to be drawn and quartered. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's not pretty. But his execution was commuted, and he was sent to Van Diemen's Land, which we know as Tasmania. Now, for him to get off, it took 3 years. So he was in Tasmania, his father was in Ireland, and the captain that was hired to get him off was in England. So for 3 years, there was that triangle of letters in getting him off there. And finally, he did get off, and he got to New York City, and he was hailed as a hero. He was a speech maker, a lecturer. He entered the bar, and in '59, he helped Dan Sickles to be acquitted of murder, the first plea of temporary insanity. Does anybody know who the defendant was, or who Sickles shot? Which one, though? The son of Francis Scott Key, Philip Barton Key. So here's Sickles' wife, who was having an affair with Key, and here's Key. And then here's from Harper's Weekly of Sickles shooting Key. I don't know who this is. The second one. No, it wasn't a duel. It was not a duel. He just went up and shot him. He would not have gotten off on an insanity plea if it was a duel. So he just went up. So I don't know who this guy is. I really don't. I just found these two images today, and I'm like, who is that guy? So I don't know. So Sickles got up, and we all know Sickles. We don't need to get into Sickles. So Marr was captain in New York militia. Then after Fort Sumter, raised a company of Zouaves, Irish Zouaves, which became part of the 69th New York, commanded by Corcoran. His horse was shot out from him at Bull Run, first Bull Run. His troops were very hesitant, but he got up, he rallied them with his sword, the Emerald Banner, and the memory of Fontenoy. Now, Battle of Fontenoy was May 1745. You had an Irish brigade fighting for King Louis XV of France against the British. The Irish broke the British line with the bayonet charge. So you have the memory of Fontenoy that Marr is rallying the troops with to continue on. He's thought to have been the last to have left the field of Bull Run. In New York, he had a grand design of an Irish brigade. He had 3,000 men who wanted to sign up. However, at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, the big losses there, He wanted to go back and recruit some more in New York, but he was denied. So he resigned. However, that decision didn't last long. He reconsidered. He asked for reinstatement. He was put on pretty much desk duty for a year. Brought to City Point, Virginia, where there isn't much going on, so he took up the hobby of drinking himself senseless. He didn't like Sherman, so he actually insulted Sherman, which got him assigned to the Invalid Brigade, or the Provisional Brigade, after he insulted Sherman. Does anybody know what the Invalid Brigade is? The Invalids are? What they are is they were men who had been injured fighting, and they couldn't go back out on the field, but they weren't completely crippled. So they were actually kind of on the home front. They were set to guard depots, so ammo depots, food depots, supply depots. Those are the Invalid Brigades. And Marr didn't like being there. So that December, he was ordered to New Bern, North Carolina with his division, but he was drunk, got separated from his division, or his division got separated, and he arrived without 2,000 men. Yeah, well, what are you going to do? Whiskey does that to you. So finally, that February, the Army had enough of him. He was dismissed from military service entirely. But that August, President Johnson appointed him governor of Montana Territory. July, a couple of years later, a friend was visiting him. He was on a steamboat, and at night, all of a sudden, there was shouts and there was a splash, and nobody ever saw him again. So that's what happened to Marr. That was the end of Thomas Francis Marr. Now, at the outbreak of the Civil War, so we're at Wisconsin now. We're at Wisconsin. Wisconsin had been a state for 13 years. According to the census, 35% of the population were immigrants. 4 out of 5 immigrants in the Union Army were members of mixed or non-ethnic regions. So you'll have, in the same regiment, you'll have Germans and Irish and Norwegians and English. It's mixed. It's all mixed. Foreign born were all mixed within the regiments. According to the census, 1 in 15 people in Wisconsin were Irish born, or born in Ireland itself. So, 17th Wisconsin. Found this nice little image. He looks like he had a good time the night before, or right before that picture was taken. So they were mustered at Camp Randall in Madison, March '62. Their first major engagement was at Corinth. 5 killed, 20 wounded. They were brought forward to reinforce the line. Confederates charged. They fell back. However, they suffered friendly fire. The 14th, 15th Wisconsin came up and fired into them as they were falling back. They served in Vicksburg, Atlanta. They were on the March to the Sea. They were even in the Grand Review in D.C. Other names for some of the companies, you had names like the Mulligan Guard, Corcoran Guards, the Peepo Day Boys. They were mustered out July 1865. Altogether, 269 men were lost during service. So 41 were killed, 228 to disease.
How did they get that, the 17? I'm Irish too. They have to know that. Why they were called the 17?
Well, it depends on when the regiment was formed. So that your numbering of regiments depends on when they were formed. So I'm not sure of what.
Simpler than that St. Patrick's Day, or 17.
I don't know if that's the truth or not. I know that, but I don't know if that's the truth or not. You know, there are a lot of things that you hear, but it's not quite the truth. We'll go with it. We'll just believe them. We'll go with it for tonight. We'll go with I get to leave. You guys get to see him every month, so we'll go with that. All right, so this is the flag of the 17th Wisconsin. It's the best image I could find. All right, the 17th Wisconsin. There's their monument at Vicksburg, and this is Anthony O'Brien. He was killed at that at Corinth, that first fight. 6th Wisconsin. Any thoughts on why they were the 6th? Okay. So the 6th Wisconsin was part of the Iron Brigade. And the Iron Brigade were eventually became very tough and very well known. There was a company within the 6th Wisconsin that had 100 Irishmen from Milwaukee. They were known as the Montgomery Guards. So that regiment, let's see. What did I write? I can't remember why I wrote that line. I don't remember. So they had one of the highest kill rates in all the Union regiments. So at Gettysburg, they actually counterattacked on Mississippi soldiers, and they actually forced the surrender of 200 Confederate soldiers. So they were at Second Bull Run, South Mountain, Antietam, Mine Run, and they were also in the Grand Review. 357 total lost during service, 16 officers, 228 killed or wounded, one officer, and 112 from disease were lost.
Our friend Lance Ferdigan.
Lance?
His relative, his ancestor, that was Iron Brigade.
Okay, all right.
Many books that he wrote on there.
Yeah. Just a few, yeah. He wrote just a few books. All right, so one member of the 6th Wisconsin was James Patrick Sullivan. So he was a 17-year-old farm worker who was from Juneau County. He enlisted in the Company K, which was one of those mixed companies of native and foreign-born. He was wounded at South Mountain, had his toe amputated, Gettysburg, Petersburg, Hatcher's Run. He re-enlisted 3 times. And eventually, after the war, he actually started, he met an editor from a newspaper, from the Milwaukee Telegraph. And he was asked to write about his experience. So they started printing it in serial form. And actually later on, his son made it, actually combined it all into a book. And that book is actually on the bibliography sheet that I actually gave you guys. That book on Amazon. All right, so the Confederate Irish Brigade, if you want to call it that. So the 10th Tennessee was really the only regiment that was really identified as Irish by the Confederate Army. All the others were just sprinkled within other regiments throughout the Army. Various Irish units served among the Confederate Army, like I just said. And a lot of regiments from multiple states, they thought themselves a brigade, even though they weren't. One of those is Cobb's Brigade, also known as McMillan's Guard. So you guys have seen Gods and Generals. So the scene with the Confederates at the stone wall, firing down the swords, that was Cobb's Brigade, right there. So Robert McMillan, he was born in County Antrim, which was Northern Ireland. He was a grocer, state senator, before he raised the 24th. He became colonel. His son was the major. They were at Fair Oaks, Antietam, Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor, Petersburg. This is that scene in Gods and Generals. They held off the Irish Brigade at Fredericksburg. They only suffered 13 casualties. They left with 660 men. Only 60 men returned. So that was a big hit right there. So the 1st Louisiana, also known as the Tiger Rifles. We'll get to why they're called that. So Robert O. Wheat raised 12,000 men for his. He was from New Orleans. He fought in Mexican-American War, Nicaragua, and in Italy, he was on the side of the Garibaldis. So he fought on the side for unification. So the guys that I talked about earlier were fighting against unification. He was on the other side. He fought with the Garibaldis. His men were all just a bunch of mix. So you had lawyers, doctors, thieves, cutthroats, a whole mix of a lot of bad guys. But they became very tough fighters. They eventually became reputed as the toughest fighters in the Army of Northern Virginia. I heard a story that a woman asked the soldier one time what regiment he was with. He told her the 1st Louisiana. She fainted dead away because they said it had such a fearsome reputation. At Second Bull Run, they refused to retreat, and they ran out of ammunition. They started throwing rocks at the Union soldiers. They were the only Confederates to break the Union line at Gettysburg. Spotsylvania, they held the position, saving Lee from destruction. Wheat was first wounded at First Bull Run, and he was mortally wounded the next year at Gaines Mill. Out of those 12,000 men, only 373 returned home. So that was a big loss right there. Now, this regiment, this is where the mascot for LSU comes from, the Tigers. It's not because of the cat, it's because of these guys. So Charles Coates was a chemistry professor. He was from Baltimore. He had played football at Johns Hopkins in the 1880s. He arrived at LSU in 1893, and he actually became the football coach when he actually started the team, and they didn't have a mascot yet, they didn't have a team name yet. So he heard about these guys, and he's like, Tigers. That's where they came from. That's where the mascot came from. Let's see, anything else? Yeah. So this picture is from the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg. This is a picture of Wheat's Tigers in formation, rifles stacked. So this is them. George B. What can we say? Ulster Scott Heritage. So entered in 42, military academy, graduated second in his class of 50. So he automatically became an engineer. Your top graduates, I heard 5 once, but it could be a different number. Your top graduates always went right into the engineer corps. So McClellan, Meade, all those guys, Lee, were all engineers. Mexican-American War. He commanded the Army of the Potomac after Manassas, then eventually became leader of all federal forces. And we all know how he was as a leader. Not a very good one. He was a good organizer, just not a good field commander. Failed Peninsula Campaign, 7 days. Campaign removed by Lincoln, reinstalled. Went after Lee at Antietam. It's considered a victory, but depends on how you look at it. So he was pulled again. Signed death duty, pretty much ended his career. I'm sure everybody knows, he did not like Lincoln. Some of the things he called him a well-meaning baboon, a gorilla. There was one time Lincoln and Seward and Secretary Hayes, they actually went to McClellan's home to talk to him. Servant let him in, said that he wasn't there. They waited, came home. He excused himself. Half an hour later, the servant came in and said that McClellan had gone to bed. He didn't like him. So he ran as the Democratic candidate for president, 64, lost, of course. And he was an engineer after the war and governor of New Jersey. Sheridan, parents were from County Cavan. Served in the military academy, then was stationed in Texas, California, the Pacific Northwest. Started out as a cavalryman, 2nd Michigan, promoted to Major General. Was then moved to be an infantry commander in the Army of the Cumberland, was defeated at Chickamauga, but then he was moved back to cavalry and by Grant. And cavalry was his thing, and so he was sent into the Shenandoah by Grant, and he did a good job there. Helped capture Petersburg at Five Forks. After the war, he oversaw Reconstruction in Louisiana, Texas, Missouri. He stayed in the Army, was General-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, eventually. Patty O'Rourke. That's him, and that's his monument at Gettysburg. So he was the first non-native citizen to secure appointment at West Point. Graduated first in his class, in the second class of 1861. So he became an engineer. He was an engineer at Bull Run. He was at Fort Pulaski. Eventually, he got transferred over to being colonel of the 140th New York, and they fought at Fredericksburg. Chancellorsville they fought at, second day of Gettysburg. So they were going along, and they were stationed at the opposite end from the 20th Maine. Men were wanted to charge at the Confederates to slow them down. He volunteered his men. He actually charged with his sword. As he was going down, he was shot through the neck, was dead when he hit the ground. Now, July 9th, 1862, he was married to Clara Bishop. On their 1-year anniversary, she arrived at Gettysburg to claim his body. So, a little sad, that monument right there stands where he fell. His men said his likeness had to be on it, or else nothing. So that's why his likeness is there, because it was the request of his men. Patrick Claiborne, he's from County Cork. He failed the Trinity College entrance exam, so instead of going home and telling his parents that he failed, he joined the Army. Joined the 41st Foot. Eventually, he saved up enough money to buy his way out of the Army. You could do that. And he moved to Helena, Arkansas in 1850. In 61, he was placed as commander of the 2nd Brigade, Army of Central Kentucky. He was wounded in the mouth at Shiloh, wounded twice at Perryville, promoted to Major General, fought at the Battle of Stones River. Went up against Thomas at Chickamauga. Lost, then he proposed to arm slaves, to offer them their freedom to fight, because he saw that the Confederates didn't have enough men. But that was squashed by Davis. Fought at the Atlanta campaign. He was killed at Franklin. Now, his home in Ireland, his birthplace, Bride Park Cottage in County Cork, is for sale. 1.1 million euros, which amounts to just over $1.2 million. This is it. That's his house. So that's his house. That's the inside. It's beautiful. And then there's also a plaque. Yeah, there you go. Just pull your money together, and there you go. You guys can have a nice summer home in Ireland. So yeah, so that his house is for sale. All right, so religious men. So let's see. So in this, this is at Harrison's Landing in Virginia in the summer of 1862. So sitting from left to right, so you have Captain J.J. McCormick, James Dillon, who was a priest, William Corby, who was a priest. He's the one we'll talk about. And then standing, you have Patrick Dillon, who was a priest, and Dr. Philip O'Hanlon. It's not too often you get a picture where an officer has his jacket open. It's always buttoned up, or he has a vest, something like that, but he does not have either. So William Corby, his father was from County Offaly. You guys know where both these two pictures are? So, yes, this is Gettysburg. Where is this? Fighting Irish, Notre Dame. It's on the campus of Notre Dame. These are identical statues. Now, he was born in Detroit. He was sent to Notre Dame to train for the priesthood. He and his brother went to Notre Dame. He trained for. So this is what the CSC stands for. So it's the Congregatio a Sancta Cruce. So Congregation of the Holy Cross. He entered his novitiate in 1856. Final vows 59. Became prefect of discipline at Notre Dame. When the Civil War started, he wanted to help, so he was actually entered the chaplain corps, and he was assigned to the 88th New York of the Irish Brigade. At the Wheeled Field at Gettysburg, he donned his purple stole, climbed out the banner, and men kneeled, and he performed general absolution on all the men. So this is the boulder that he stood on, right here. That's where the statue. After the war, he became vice president of Notre Dame, and then next year became president. And then in 1872, he was transferred to St. Bernard's in Watertown, Wisconsin. That's where he ended his priesthood career. And that's a painting of him giving absolution, standing on the boulder at the wheat field. Sailors. So this is the crew of the USS Colorado. They were part of the blockade, Anaconda Plan. You had over 118,000 Union Jacks. Approximately 20% were Irish. And most of them couldn't swim. They were landsmen. They couldn't swim. A lot of them couldn't swim. Most of them were in the blockade. They were usually from rougher backgrounds, so working class backgrounds. A lot of them had no previous maritime experience. They couldn't swim, like I said. So, two men. Oh, I should have put in I got myself backwards. So, two Irishmen who served in the Confederate Army. So Hugh Lindsay, he was born in Ireland, don't know where. He was a carpenter on the CSS Virginia. He was at Hampton Roads. He was, for a time, he was at a naval station at Wilmington, North Carolina. John Fay left in Ireland in 1850 to New Orleans, joined the 1st Louisiana that we talked about earlier. Later transferred to the Navy. He served on the Louisiana during the Battle of New Orleans. 62 was taken prisoner and paroled. A month later, 67, he moved to Texas, and he was a laborer. 1919, he was admitted to the Confederate Veterans Home. Now, this is the USS Hatteras. Now, the Hatteras was originally built as a civilian steamship. The Navy in 1861. It was bought by the Navy later that year. It became part of the blockade. The Navy outfitted it. It became part of the blockade off Florida before being transferred to Galveston Bay in Texas. Let's see. So he actually, and it actually participated in Farragut's assault on Mobile Bay. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. But eventually it ended up in Galveston Bay. January 1863, they were tracking a ship that was identifying itself as a British ship, but when they got to 200 yards, the other ship, they struck the British colors, raised the Confederate colors, and they opened fire. It was the Confederate raider CSS Alabama. So you had 126 men who were captured off the Hatteras, and they were actually brought to Port Royal, Jamaica, where they were then paroled to the United States. To get back to the United States, they were paroled by the Confederates. They weren't taking them back, but they said, here, you're on land. Get home how you want. The reason why I brought up the Hatteras, only 2 men were lost on the Hatteras. Both of them were Irishmen. So you had 32-year-old coal heaver William Healy, 24-year-old stoker John Cleary. 64, the Alabama was sunk by the USS Kearsarge, and when it was in for repairs at a French port. So the Kearsarge, the Kearsarge couldn't go into the port because it was a neutral port and open fire. So they just waited until the Alabama came out, and the Alabama tried rushing them, and they got sunk in the channel. So the Hatteras actually became uncovered in the 1970s when there was an earthquake. It was 57 feet of water 20 miles off the coast of Galveston. So it is, because those 2 men are still buried, still entombed within, it is considered a war grave by the U.S. Navy. In September 2012, there was actually a memorial service that was held by Reverend Stephen Duncan of the Diocese of Houston. He's a big Civil War history buff. So this is actually the service right here. So this is them performing it, and they actually laid a wreath over the top of the wreck. Now, different flags. So this is also, this is the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg. This is the Irish Brigade flag right here. So Erin go bragh. And again, like I said at the beginning, you see you've got the harp, you've got the clover. So those are big. I mean, any Irish flag, you'll actually see it. It was a big, the symbolism of that is pretty much everywhere in Irish. So you've got the 63rd New York. So you can see you got the harp, you've got the sun, you've got the clover, but you can see this is their regimental battle flag. So Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Savage Station, Gaines Mill, Antietam, Glendale, Bristow Station. 69th New York, again, Harp, Clover. 88th New York, 90th Illinois, 24th Georgia, Cobb's Brigade. 10th, the 10th Tennessee, also they named themselves the Sons of Aaron. Now monuments to the Irish. So this is at Fredericksburg. So it lists all the regiments within Fredericksburg who were at Fredericksburg. So and it shows the killed, wounded, missing. So then at the bottom it says, to the sons of Aaron who put God, country, and duty before self, we must never forget the sacrifices they made for our freedom, Aaron go bragh. And then you actually go, you can see you got the harp and the sunshine and the clover up here as well. This is, I'm sure everybody's been to Gettysburg, seen this wonderful monument. You've got the Celtic cross, and you got the Irish wolfhound laying at the base. This is Irish Brigade Monument at Antietam at the Sunken Road. I actually took both those pictures. I was at both of them. Confederate Irish Memorial, Charleston, South Carolina. And then this is in Tazewell, Tennessee. There we go. That's everything. What time are we at? 8:14. Okay. Questions? And I might have answers.
What does that inscription actually mean on the flag?
You mean with the harp?
No, that
No.
wording.
Oh, Aaron go bragh? No, I'm not sure. Ireland forever. Okay, yes. There's also another saying that the Irish have is fa bala. So F-A-U-G-H, then an A, then a B-A-L-L-A-G-H. That means clear the way. So clear the way, let us through.
Movie presentations of the Irish. First of Gods in General at Fredericksburg, was that accurate? Or is that a Hollywood hype?
You know what? The Irish at Fredericksburg suffered a lot. So I'm sure it's Hollywood. So, you could have truth in there, but it's Hollywood. So they embellish things. So, but I'm sure with the carnage that they saw, at a 45% casualty rate, 545 men out of 1,200. That's carnage right there. So I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure there's truth, but there's also fiction mixed in there.
In Gangs of New York, I don't know if you saw that movie.
I have not seen that movie yet. No, I know. I should.
Portrayed the Irish coming off the boat and they were immediately enlisted.
Yeah, that happened quite a bit. Yeah, because the Union Army, they needed men. So a lot of times they were, almost immediately after they docked, there was a recruitment station pretty much nearby.
With the money.
Exactly. Yeah. And see, the money is why a lot of men enlisted, because a union private, well, actually private on both sides, got paid $13 a month. That's good money right there. But it also depends on your branch of service. You could have earned, depending on where you served, you could have earned more than that. But that $13 a month is pretty much the low end. And then wherever you went, and as you get higher in rank, then you get paid more money as well. My reenacting unit, we portray engineers. An engineer private got paid $17 a month. The reason is they knew how to read, they knew how to write, they could do math, they had an education. That's why they earned more.
Can I make a comment here? Being Irish, and we hear a lot about the slaves
Mm-hmm.
here, and the first slaves were Irish.
They were.
Taken off the streets of Ireland, young people sent over here to grow tobacco and sugar.
Yeah, they were indentured service. They were pretty much slaves, but they were called indentured servants. Yeah, they were pretty much, a lot of them were indentured servants. Yeah.
My ancestor was an indentured servant. So he's
Okay.
say carpenter to pay his way.
Mm-hmm. exactly.
You know, we talk about the blacks being the first slaves, that was not.
They were not.
That was not the case.
Nope, they were not. Anything else? Yes.
That one earlier frame you had about these riots in New York
Mm-hmm.
at that island because there were sick. I had read that when people came off, immigrants come off a boat, if they were sick, they were loaded right up and sent back again,
Yeah, it depended. I'm assuming, you know.
wherever they'd come from.
Yeah, I think some were sent back, but it just depended on, you know, it depended on when they came. I mean, and the seriousness of their illness. I mean, if they weren't that serious, but the government still wasn't going to release them into the general population, they would hold them at the quarantine camps. But yeah, you get the people in Staten Island who were living there. They did not like the quarantine camps being there right near their home, so that they got mad about that. So there was a little bit of rioting.
Reenacting, now, there was a bomb threat at one of the reenactment things a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
What, does that hurt the reenactors now? Has the participation gone down or not?
Well, the thing about reenacting is participation has been going down because it really hit its peak. Really, you had back in the late 80s, early 90s, you had Glory, you had Ken Burns' documentary. That's what spurred a lot of people. Really, your first reenactment was really 1863. Because I know, hang on, I'll tell you why. I got a really weird look from like, what are you talking about? So a year after the Battle of Antietam, you actually had men who served, and they actually they're actually sent back. Let's see, by their spears, and they just to show them, you know, what happened. And then after the war, you had the veterans who they would actually, you know, they would actually go back to the battlefields, and you had people, and they would actually walk those battlefields and show them. So you actually had very early on. I mean, modern day reenactors started probably about the 1950s, 1940s, right around there. So you had, you know, Sears work belts, and you had World War II weapons and all that. And later on, as you get further on, then you get, starting in the 1980s, you start getting actual reproduction items, so leathers and uniforms and all that. And then you get Glory and Ken Burns, and that's what really got started. And you had, I mean, let's see, what did they say? I think it was the 135th Gettysburg, from what I've been told. I've only been reenacting since 2000, so it was after that. It was before me. Guy said they actually had enough reenactors there to do a full Pickett's charge. That's how many men they had as reenactors there. So they had enough to do a full Pickett's charge going across. So, but for reenacting these days, population-wise, it's going down because you have all those guys who started are aging out. A lot of them were waiting for the 150th cycle, so 2011 to 2015 to finish, and then they hung up their leather and wool. And so it's slowly starting to go down. Down by me, I live in the Chicago area, you're starting to have events go away as well. So it's something we have to adjust to.
Yeah, the alternative to that is we were reenactors for like 25 years.
Okay.
Instead of, when we got too old to do that, we all went GAR.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You could.
we probably have the biggest GAR unit in the United States.
About 18 guys.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Hey, somebody's got to do it. I actually just this past January I joined the Sons of Union Veterans. I have 3 ancestors who fought. So.
So speaking of reenacting, what's the first Michigan and yourself doing the first weekend in June? We have a nice reenactment up this part.
Which one?
Pinecrest?
Pinecrest. Well, we've already settled on our schedule, so sorry. Well, I'll keep it in mind though for next
You've
year.
done Jackson.
We've done Jackson. We've done Jackson. We've done Hastings.
Yeah, we used to go to Jackson every year,
Mm-hmm.
wife and I.
Yeah. Now, May 16th. We will actually be, First Michigan will actually be doing a living history at the Civil War Museum in Kenosha. Lance Hertigan will be there that day talking about beer in the Civil War. So just to let you know. But we will actually, we'll have our equipment and stuff set up. What we will also be doing, now a couple of years ago, we were contacted by a guy, I'm blanking on his name right now. He lives in Durango, Colorado. Now, we represent First Michigan Engineers Company E. His great-grandfather was in Company E of the First Michigan. So he emailed us and said, I have letters. They're getting old just like me. Nobody else in my family wants them. Do you want them? So he sent us 22 letters. One of the pages has company letterhead on it, original company letterhead on it. And if anybody, I don't know if I'll be able to bring it up, but one of our members actually works in a print shop. And he actually did some high-resolution scans of all the letters. And for the page with the letterhead, he digitally erased the writing on it, leaving the letterhead, so we can actually have pages to write on with original company letterhead on them. So we will actually, May 16th, the day that we'll be set up at Kenosha, we will actually be turning those letters over to the museum for preservation. Because they already have some letters of a man, John Norton, who served in Company E of the First Michigan. So they've already got his letters. So this will be, in addition, another man in addition to Norton's letters. It'll be Culver. That's his name. Albert Culver was the man who served. John Culver was great-grandson who contacted us. So, yes?
When I was in junior high, I had a teacher that was a Civil War buff. That's kind of how I got hooked on it, but he did Gettysburg in 1963 and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Reenactment out there for that. And through him, I bought my first musket before I had my driver's license. At $185 for reproduction.
Oh my gosh, $185. Oh, to have that these days.
I still do have it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying to buy one like that these days a rifle will cost you about $1,000. It'll cost you about $1,000. So, oh well. All right, well, if there isn't anything else, I want to thank everybody for welcoming me here. Thank you, Connie, for inviting me. And if you have any more questions, feel free to come on up. Don't worry, I'm not walking off with it. He said, I can put it here, but don't leave with it. It's like, I won't. If I do, she knows where to find me.
Well, thank you, Brian, for the very
Sure
nice,
thing. Here you go.
topic. And is there anything else that should come forward to our meeting tonight, Nick? All right, I entertain